We are in the middle of a 10-part series through the Sermon on the Mount that we've titled The Narrow Path. This is taken from the words of Jesus at the end of the sermon, following this narrow path. But what we've discovered so far is that this is a narrow path that leads to a spacious life. What seems counterintuitive actually creates in us a spacious, vibrant, flourishing soul. And not just one that is good for us to experience ourselves, but that we become a blessing for the world around us. And so far in this series, perhaps it's been the same for you, but I feel like I have come to a far deeper understanding and appreciation for what Jesus is doing in this sermon. The eyes of my heart have been enlightened to see this in an extraordinarily powerful way. And one of the things that particularly has stood out to me so far is this. Last week, Lawrence especially emphasized this, but the righteousness of the Pharisees was something like external rule keeping. It was a surface level righteousness that had no real depth to it. They lived by the letter of the law, and so as long as you didn't commit adultery or murder or so on and so forth, as long as you fulfilled the letter of the law and checked off that box that I have done this or I haven't done this, then you fulfilled it. But what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount is taking it to a far deeper level. It is not merely external rule keeping, but it is internal transformation. And the difference between these two things is much like what Lawrence talked about in the Lord's Supper this morning. That we become not a tree that is stranded in the desert, reliant upon its own life source, and we bear this sort of inauthentic fruit before we just kind of shrivel and die because we're not sustained by this inner transformative life. But instead, we're like this tree that's planted in good soil by streams of water, and we bear and abound in good fruit. That's the difference between this external rule keeping and this internal transformation. This is true righteousness, right with God and right with one another. But one of the biggest factors, one of the biggest barriers in keeping us from living a life of internal transformation is the need for approval. And that's where Jesus takes us next. In this next section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addresses what is perhaps the primary barrier to internal transformation in our lives. And what happens is, instead of living a transformative life, we live this performative life, where everything we do is just for show. And here's what he says beginning in Matthew 6 and verse 1. He says, beware. Now, anytime Jesus says beware, it's like a really good idea to beware. So he says, beware, watch out of practicing your righteousness, of practicing how right you are with God, how close you are with God, and how you look in the eyes of other people, how good you appear to be. Be careful of doing that in front of others in order to be seen by them. For then you'll have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. There is a part of every one of us that really wants to be seen, right? There's a part of every one of us that wants to be seen, and that's not inherently a bad thing. We have this desire within us for favor and approval, acceptance and validation. We say that we don't want anyone to judge us. We want to live in a judgment-free zone, but the truth is we really do want people to judge us. We just want people to judge us with favor, acceptance, and validation. In other words, we want people to look upon us with love. We want to be fully seen and fully loved. And that is about as deep a desire of the human heart as we can possibly get. When it gets down to the core, this is essentially what every human heart longs for, to be seen and loved. But somewhere along the way, we begin to believe this fundamental lie. We begin to think, if I was truly seen, then I could never be truly loved. If I was truly seen, I could never be truly loved. That's the lie that permeates our soul. We start to think, I have to put on a show, I have to put on a performance so that people don't see who I really am or what I'm really like. And so from a very early age, we learn to control the way people see us in order, we think, to win their love, to win their approval and validation. In the realm of social psychology, this is known as impression management. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Impression management, we all want to impress, or maybe we could say we want to make an impression. We want to make a good impression, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing to make a good impression, but impression management takes it to a whole other level where it is the attempt to control how others perceive us as a means of obtaining social rewards and enhancing self-esteem. So this is the definition of the American Psychological Association, the APA. This is their definition. And you can see, let's just highlight a few things here. First of all, it's an attempt. It's a futile effort. We're not really capable of controlling the way other people see us, but we do this as a means of obtaining these social rewards. We feel like we gain some sense of status. We elevate our position among other people, or we begin to feel really good about ourselves. Our esteem shoots up when we're able to control the way others see us. And so this is what almost every person falls into. And the question is not so much whether or not we do this, but to what extent. It's almost as if we all have this sort of cancer within us, but it affects each one of us in different parts of our body, in different areas of our lives. We all struggle with approval addiction, with impression management. Can you remember when this first showed up in your life? You know, it's so interesting that with young kids, this isn't really much of a thing, and that's kind of what we love about them. I mean, they're so full of expression and life. They haven't yet learned the ability to control the way others see them, and so it's exciting and fun to be around, and maybe a good way of thinking about it is we see their soul. And we see that their soul is full of life and vibrancy because they're not consumed by shame and the opinions of other people bearing down on them. But at some point, at a very early age, we begin to learn how to do this. And can you remember what it was for you? One of the first memories that I have of doing this is around 5th grade. I had this, there was this club called the After School Club. And in elementary, if you put club after anything, it's like automatically the coolest thing you could do. So I wanted to be a part of the After School Club. And the way this worked was they would stay after school, they would help with the different tasks that the teachers would assign them. They would monitor the hallways, which was a great position of authority to hold. And they wore these maroon vests. And stitched into it was our school logo in gold. And this maroon and gold vest was like everything that I could want in 5th grade. And of course, part of my desire maybe was good. Maybe I did want to help people. I wanted to strive to be of aid to the teachers, but over time, it became this greater desire that it wasn't so much I wanted to help other people as much as I wanted to be seen as helpful. And what that vest came to symbolize for me and for a lot of other kids was when you see that vest, you see someone who is smart because you had to have a certain grade to make it in, someone who is competent, someone who is helpful, someone who had a status above their peers, someone who was a leader. And so I longed to put on that vest as a way of gaining some kind of social reward, to be looked upon with favor and approval and validation, and to enhance my self-esteem. Feel really good about myself when I put that vest on. And throughout the rest of my growing up years, there were many other vests that I put on. Later, it became sports. It was like, if I can make this team, then I will really have made it. I will be elevated to a status among my peers that everybody will look upon me with favor and approval and validation. I'm going to feel really good about myself. And then maybe a little bit later, I remember I really wanted to be accepted into Texas A&M University. And in Houston, Texas, that's like that's like the peak achievement of any high school student. You want so desperately to go to Texas A&M University and put on that Aggie ring, and it was just everything I could want. But what I realized over time was it wasn't just that I wanted to learn. I didn't want to just grow in knowledge. I didn't want to just pursue a career. I wanted the status that came with it. I wanted my family and my church family and the people around me to look at me and say, wow, we're so proud of this accomplishment, so that I would feel pretty good about myself. And there were other things throughout the years. Even interestingly, when I got to FC, going to devotions became a status symbol. It was like the more things that you can go to, the more things that you can put your time in, the more that you start to feel like you're a pretty good person, like you've got a pretty good relationship with God, and other people kind of tell you that. But what was it for you? These are some of the ways that I strove for impression management and control the way that other people see me. But maybe for you, maybe you were the class clown, and you thought, if I can just make everybody laugh, if I can just bring humor into the room, then I'll feel accepted. I'll feel validated in my existence. I'll feel valuable to other people. Or maybe you were the overachiever. Maybe you thought, if I can just perform at peak level in academics or sports, if I can just keep achieving and strive for greatness, then it's not just that I'll do well and excel for the sake of others, but I'll gain some kind of reward from it myself. Or maybe the one that you went for was to be thought of as attractive. This is one that I see a lot within all the various camps that I help out with. I see so many, especially young girls, who feel like their worth is so tied up in their beauty, in how they're seen, whether that's in the eyes of other boys or often in comparison with other girls. And it's not just that they long to be beautiful, it's that they long to be more beautiful than the people around them so that they're celebrated in the eyes of those people. It's this impression management. And it's this exhausting way of life. Maybe you were the peacemaker and you found worth in maintaining good relationships with everyone. Or maybe you were even the rebel. Maybe you were the person who said, maybe you were so worried about not wanting other people to think that you cared how they thought about you, that you were just as consumed as everyone else with what other people thought about you. I said that in a really confusing way. But maybe you were the person who said, I don't care how other people see me at all, but really underneath that is this idea that I just don't want people to think I care what other people think. And so in every avenue of life, this is just what I want us to see. This affects every one of us, not just the Pharisees. This is innate to human existence. And the Pharisees just so happen to be the people who mastered the art of impression management. Here's how Jesus talks about them. In Matthew 23, he says, they do everything to be seen by others. First of all, notice they make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. We're not going to go into what in the world that means, but in other words, they dress to impress. They want who they are to be seen and to be publicized for everyone to look at. And again, think about how that affects us today. Perhaps the CEO has a particular clothing line that it's like, I wear this so that you know who I am. Or maybe it's that same young girl who struggles so desperately with being seen as attractive in the eyes of other people, and so it's about the clothes that I wear. And that gives me a sense of self-worth. There are many, many different ways that this affects us. The second one is he says they love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogue. They seek position and status. They don't just want to help other people. They want to be seen as powerful, as elite, as rubbing shoulders with the in-group. And then the last thing he says is they love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. They love respect and admiration. And so this is very much the same ways that we function as a society, and data shows that social media has significantly increased our need for this. It's like we can hardly do anything without it being publicized in some way. The likes, the comments are a way of getting feedback to feel better about who we are. And the word that Jesus uses for this is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. Now, I always thought of hypocrisy as acting one way, perhaps in the worship service, and then living a totally different life throughout the rest of the week. And that could be one way of thinking about it. But more accurately, hypocrisy is something like this. It's living a performative life. Interestingly, Jesus is the first person to use this word in a negative light. In all of Greco-Roman literature, it was just viewed as a technical term for the mask that actors would wear on a stage in some drama that they would put on. And there was actually an amphitheater that was constructed during Jesus' lifetime, not very far from where he grew up, that almost certainly his father Joseph worked on. There's a very high probability that Joseph actually worked on this theater, being a carpenter, and perhaps Jesus himself joined in. But regardless, Jesus somehow got this image. Jesus somehow got this word picture of, you know what I see going on with these actors who put on these masks seem a lot like the way that people live their lives. This performative life where everything is done for show. It's to be seen by other people, to be validated by other people. And so what's most interesting about the way that this happened for the Pharisees is, ironically, even their devotion to God was a stage for impression management rather than an altar for inner transformation. The Pharisees, this is what they did. They turned altars into stages. They turned altars that were meant to devote their lives to God and turn it into a stage of public performance, of impression management, to be seen by others. And Jesus in Matthew 6, he gives three specific examples of this, three stages that the Pharisees exalted themselves upon and put on a show for everybody else to see. And what I want to do is briefly look at these three examples, see what they have in common, and then consider Jesus' solution. Like, nobody wants to live this way. Nobody wants to live with this approval addiction. It's an exhausting way of life. And so we'll look at these examples and then consider Jesus' solution for approval addiction. The first example Jesus gives, he says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. You can imagine a situation like this, and perhaps this is not an exaggeration. There is some evidence that the Pharisees did, in fact, do things like this, as hard as it is to believe. And maybe we wouldn't go around sounding a trumpet, but have you ever noticed that when it comes to fundraising, and I've heard people talk about this, when it comes to fundraising, nobody wants to fund like the janitorial closet. Nobody's like, at the end of this construction project, I would really love if my name was on the janitorial closet. It's like, no, they want to put their money where it's going to be seen. They etch their names on the outside of the building. And perhaps there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but what's the motive behind it? What's the motive behind it? And he says, if the motive is just in order to be seen and validated and accepted in the eyes of other people, then that's all the reward that you're going to get. You'll receive that. It's a high probability that you'll get exactly what you're looking for, but it's not going to be very satisfying. Then he moves on. He says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. There's that mask-wearing word picture. For they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. So in the same way, when the Pharisees would go and pray, they would go on these extravagant, long-winded prayers to be heard by other people that they would look at and say, wow, you must have a really close and good relationship with God. And perhaps we don't do that so much through long-winded public prayers, but we all have those kind of status symbols of like, look how close to God I am. I remember in high school, it seemed like, I don't want to just pick on the girls, but I feel like it was like the more you could color in your Bible, the more like the closer you were to God. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm someone who I have to mark up my Bible to stay focused. But it's like it turns into a coloring book at some point, and it's just to be seen by other people. Again, it's not that that's bad. It's what's the motive behind that. And there's all kinds of other things that we do. Growing up, maybe it was like you have to dress to the nines on Sunday. It's like if you're not really dressed up, then you must not really care that much about what's going on here. And so what's the motive behind why we're doing these things? The last example that he gives, he says, is when you fast. Side note, I think it's really interesting that in each example, he says, when you do this, when you give, when you pray, when you fast. How often do we do that? That's interesting. He says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. For they disfigure their faces, they look all gloomy and exhausted and drained, and they do that to show other people that they're fasting. And they say, look at how close I am to God, look at how devoted I am, look at what I give up for the Lord. And truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. And so in all three of these examples, here's what we find. Impression management brings a reward, right? When we put on the mask, when I go after that vest that has that dark maroon and the gold emblems stitched onto it, if you really go after it, you're going to get what you're looking for. And the people around you are going to applaud you and praise you and whatever else you're desiring from that. And you are going to enhance your self-esteem. You'll start to feel a little bit better about yourself. But it comes at a cost. And if I could boil it down to one word, it would be that impression management comes with a cost of relationship. It comes at a cost of relationship to others, relationship to self, and relationship to God. Have you ever noticed when maybe you meet someone for the first time, have you ever found that it's difficult to meet someone who is just trying to impress you? It's like, that's great. This is cool to hear your accolades. It's cool to hear that whatever, fill in the blank with whatever they're sharing, but it's like, I don't feel like I know you any better. You're just pat-statting. You're just padding the stats. You're whatever. Well, I don't know what I just said. That might make a YouTube short. You're just going on about yourself, but I feel like I don't really get to know who you are. And here's the thing: you can't find true friendship while living a filtered life. You ever go through, you see someone on social media and you're like, this is great, but I feel like it doesn't actually tell me anything about you because it's just this filtered existence, this curated content. And that's how a lot of us live life. And not only that, it'll mar our relationship with those others because we will compare ourselves and envy other people and elevate ourselves to the top. It will destroy our relationship with others. But also it'll destroy our relationship to ourselves. Living this kind of life is so exhausting. When I was a junior in high school, I took a trip to New York with the choir that I was a part of, and it was really neat. We got to see Wicked on Broadway. And honestly, at that point, I thought that seeing any musical as a high school boy would not at all be the impression management that I would aspire to. I thought it was going to be so boring, and I was just blown away. It was amazing. And particularly the performance by Elphaba was just extraordinary. And so we go around back, we wait for about an hour after, and all the actors who were a part of this musical, they come out and we start greeting them and they start greeting us and we get our playbill sign and all that. And I was like, I was over the top. I was fangirling in that moment. And then comes Elphaba. And I don't know that I've ever seen someone so exhausted. It's like an hour before, she was the most vibrant person on that stage, totally captivating, holding the attention of everybody in the room. But now, she's totally drained. And here's the thing. I feel like I know what that's like. I feel like I know what it's like to go into a room and put on a performance and care so much about what other people think and then walk away and just feel wiped out. And many people know what that's like to live their life that way. And they wonder why they're not in touch with themselves, why they can't figure out what's going on with what's going on under the hood, under the surface of their lives. And it's just because everything is a performance. And the more that you perform for others, the more that you lose your sense of self. But worst of all, what we lose is our relationship to God. God cannot bless the person that you're pretending to be. God can't bless the person that you're pretending to be. As Jesus put it, there's no reward in this. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is fill a void that only God can provide. As we strive for approval and validation and acceptance, we're trying to fill a void that only God can provide. And so what it comes down to is this: impression management is a way of gaining the whole world, but forfeiting our soul. It's a way of gaining exactly what we want, but feeling like there's nothing at the end of the day. And the great irony is this. The great irony is that we think if we were truly seen, we could never really be loved. But the truth is that you will never really be loved. Never really be loved till you let yourself be truly seen. So how do we break free from approval addiction? How do we move on from this? And imagine if your life could be lived that way. Like imagine if you walked in a room and it didn't matter what other people thought of you so much. And you weren't so concerned about putting on a show and putting on a performance, whether religiously or athletically or in your career. What if you just existed for the sake of others? What kind of freedom would that bring to your life? Well, the secular solution is something like this: just stop caring what others think about you and you do you. And maybe that's semi-helpful. This is, at the end of the day, much of the self-esteem movement. Just stop caring what other people think about you. Think positive thoughts about yourself, and you do you. The Bible, Jesus gives something so much greater than that. Something so much more powerful and transformative than this. And he says it back in Matthew 5 and verse 16. He says, "Let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Here's what it's all about. Maybe we could put it this way. One way of seeing this is to say, work really hard for God, and when you do that, it's actually Him working through you, and so you give Him all the glory, and that's true. But I think another way of thinking about it is something like this. Our motive in life is not to win the approval of others, but to witness to the goodness of God. In other words, when I live my life, letting my light shine, not to be seen by other people, but to show how great and good God is, that's when people glorify our Father in heaven. Another way of putting that would be when they see you, they say, have you ever been in a situation where you think, wow, they must have had some really good parents. They must have been really loved and cared for and appreciated and accepted and validated. What if people saw your life and thought that about your Father in heaven? Like, wow, they must be so loved by a good God. That's glorifying our Father. It's witnessing to the goodness of God. And this is a healthy, sustainable, and empowering motive for life. But what I want to do is ask the question, well, how do we get there? How do we actually live this kind of life where we're not concerned about the approval of others and we're more concerned about witnessing to the goodness of God? Well, look back with me at these three examples and see what Jesus says about this. He says, when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Next example, he says, when you pray, go into that inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who is in secret will reward you. And then finally, notice this last example. When you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting. So fix your hair, put some cologne on. That way it's not obvious what's going on, but only to your Father in heaven. He's the one who sees. And your Father in heaven who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Do you hear what Jesus says the solution is? The solution to approval addiction is to abide in the secret place. In all three examples, abide in the secret place. And so what is the secret place? What is that? Well, on one hand, we could think about it maybe tactically. It's a way of living life where if it comes down to our motive, then the only way to really check our motive and make sure that we're operating under the right motivation is to do things that are in secret, where nobody knows, where nobody cares, where nobody can celebrate you. And that's a really good spiritual habit to undertake. That regardless of how much of what I do is seen before others, I'm going to intentionally choose things that nobody can see just to make sure my heart's in the right place. But we can answer this not just tactically, but transformatively. That there's something deeper here that I think Jesus is getting at, and it has to do with this idea of going into the inner room. He says that especially when you pray. He says, when you pray, go into your inner room. It's this place of communion with just you and God. And as I reflected on that, as I tried to just wrestle with what this means in some concise way of putting it, I couldn't help but think about what is the inner room throughout the Bible? Like if there's one place that comes to mind when you hear the inner room or the inmost place, it's the Holy of Holies. And listen to the way that the Hebrew writer talks about this in Hebrews 10. He says, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way that He opened for us through the veil that is His flesh, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and in full assurance of faith. This is the secret place. It's the place that has been opened for us by the tearing of Jesus' flesh on the cross. The place that we previously had no real access to, the barrier that once lay between us and God and his love and favor to be felt and realized in the depth of our being, that has now been opened by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And now we can enter in. We can go into that inner room wherever we are. Whether that's literally the closet that we might choose to pray on, or whether that's some place out on a mountaintop in nature, or whether that's right here, we can enter into that inmost room and experience the love and favor of God. And here's why that works. In summary, the secret place is where we rest in the favor of our Father in heaven. Where we rest in the favor of our Father in heaven. We receive his approval, his delight, his love, his affection. And the temptation for us is to say, well, I need to stop performing for others and I need to instead perform for God. That's not what Jesus says. It's not, let me go put on a performance for God now. It's, let me rest in the secret place and receive, regardless of who I am and despite my accomplishments, I could never be more loved than I am right now. There is nothing more I could do for God. There's no accomplishment I could achieve in life or in spirituality that would make him love me any more than in this moment. And we receive the Father's love. And the reason that works is because of something like this. Here's a quote from this secular author, this person who is an atheist, but I think puts this so well. The attention of others matters to us because we are afflicted by a congenital uncertainty, this uncertainty that we feel from birth to our own value. As a result, we tend to allow others' appraisals to play a determining role in how we see ourselves. Our sense of identity is held captive by the judgments of others. This is the reality of most of our world and of a lot of my life, where I value myself based upon the approval, the appraisal of others. And the solution to that is to receive the affection of the one who is absolutely at the top of the hierarchy. See, we go through life looking for approval and validation from the next person and the next person and the next person, because from one individual, it's never enough. It's not enough to receive it just from our parents, no matter how great they were. It's not enough to receive it from a coach or a professor or a boss or so on and so forth. We're always searching for that next sense of validation. But the only thing that rids us of that approval addiction is to go to our Father and receive his favor in the secret place, knowing that there is no greater person from which I could receive love than the one who created life itself. And if I have that, if that has really seeped down into the depths of my being, then I don't really need to live for anything else. So much of us, so many of us live with this orphan spirit. This orphan spirit where we try to earn from wounding what is ours by God's blessing. But the good news is that you don't have to earn God's favor. You already have it. It is already yours in Christ Jesus, from whom all blessings flow. And so my hope is that at the end of my life, and I hope this is the right way of putting it, my hope is that as I try to live not from this orphan spirit, but from this spirit of adoption that cries out, Abba, Father, and knows that I'm a beloved son, with the approval and validation of a good Father in heaven, that people at the end of my life, however many years that might be, would not look upon my life and say, wow, Jarrett, he did some really great things. And not just like career accomplishments, but even just the thought of being seen as a good person. I hope that it's not just people look back at my life and say, Jarrett, you did some good things and you made an impact on people. My hope, or at least the place that I'm trying to get to, is that people would say at the end of my life, Jarrett must have been somebody who is deeply loved by a really, really, really good God. And to me, that is worth everything. The approval of our good Father in heaven. The way that the Hebrew writer talks about receiving that approval is by being washed in the blood. And if you desire that this morning, if you long for that relationship with a good Father to receive that validation so you don't have to struggle with approval addiction and impression management any longer, the water is prepared and we'd love to help you with that. But in any way that we can assist you this morning, come now as together we stand and sing.